So we're going to sound check presenter's laptop, sound check presenter's laptop, GIC budget, 9:02 a.m., March 3rd, and clerk's laptop, sound check clerk's laptop, March 3rd, general issues budget. Thank you. We are in.
Good morning, members of council, staff, and the public who are watching live. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audio during committee meetings. And members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during the meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. I'll now proceed with the roll call. Once I indicate, may you please indicate your presence when I call out your name. Mayor Eisenberger.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Farr? Not here yet. Councillor Marula?
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor. Present.
Good morning. Councillor Collins?
Present.
Good morning. Councillor Jackson, we know will be joining us shortly. Councillor Danko?
Present.
Good morning. Councillor Clark?
Good morning, Deputy Mayor.
Good morning. Councillor Pearson?
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor. Present.
Good morning. Councillor Johnson?
Good morning, Councillor Nan.
Councillor Ferguson?
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Vanderbeek?
Good morning, I'm present.
Good morning. And Councillor Vanderbeek, your volume is a little low, so you might want to check that in the background. Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Partridge.
Yes, good morning. And just so Madam Clerk, you know that I am having trouble with eScribe this morning, and my video Zoom meetings the last 2 days have not been that successful. So I may have to just give a thumbs up, thumbs down, or speak, one of the other.
Sounds good. And switching to audio, duly noted. Councillor Wilson.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor Nan.
Good morning. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, there are changes for today's agenda. Added as 6.1, the 2021 tax supported operating budget recommendations, report FCS 21001A, as well added 6.1A, the accessible taxicab financial incentive program. This matter was referred to the 2021 budget but hasn't been considered yet.
Okay, thank you. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Wilson. To approve the agenda as amended, the electronic vote shall be up. Just a moment, it should, there we go. And that carries, nope. Councillor Collins, if you could please indicate. You're good, thank you very much. And Councillor Partridge, thumbs up, thumbs down?
I did give a thumbs up, thank you.
Thank you. And that carries. Moving on to declarations of members of committee, are there any declarations of interest this morning? Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, Madam Chair, item 6.1, which is the accessible taxicab, I'll be declaring an interest in that. I'm an investor in that industry.
Thank you. Seeing no other declarations, just a reminder that those have noted conflict, please ensure that when it comes to time to vote on the matter, that you vote using the abstain option, and your conflict will be noted directly in the committee minutes. And moving on to approval of the minutes of the previous agenda, February 25th, 2021. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Pearson, to approve the minutes of February 25th as presented. There's no discussion. The vote shall be before you.
Here we go.
And that, Councillor Collins. Thank you for your vote.
Chat. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And clerks, has that passed? Wonderful. So we don't have any communication items or consent. Moving on to agenda item number 6, staff presentations, and we have 6.1, 2021 tax supported operating budget recommendations, report FCS 21001A citywide. General Manager Mike Zagaric of Finance and Corporate Services will provide a presentation for this item. Good morning, General Manager Zagaric. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I will start to share my presentation.
And just a reminder as that presentation is going up for all other members on the call to mute your microphones.
Again, good morning through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I want to start with thanking committee members for the opportunity to release our Monday budget GIC and giving staff some additional time to prepare for today's committee meeting. And before I get into the agenda, you'll see it is a relatively light agenda in content, but there is a lot of information. So again, there are 4 topics, Madam Deputy Mayor, that I will focus on. And I'm in the hands of committee at the end of each topic if you would like me to pause and answer questions, or to complete my presentation and answer any questions that committee members might have. And just before I get into my presentation, and I appreciate that committee's allowed me to recognize staff in the past, but I do want to recognize my team once again. Over the last few days, they've really scrambled to provide this information, not only the 2021 budget information, but a look at our 2020 preliminary year end, as well as a forecast for 2022. So I want to thank Brian McMullen and his team, Kirk Weaver, Duncan Robertson, as well as the FNA managers, Ashley Bono, Amanda Thine, and David Trevisani. So again, thank you for that opportunity. I know that they spent a good part of their weekend, as well as time with me up to last night after some of them put their little ones to bed. So I do want to thank them and recognize them for their support, not only towards the corporation, but especially towards myself. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, again, the purpose for today is to not only provide a bit of a reminder to where our current 2021 budget position is, but we have a slight update based on some recent modeling, taxation modeling. As well, in the past, we haven't provided a comprehensive listing of all of the federal and provincial funding and commitments that have been extended to the city of Hamilton during this pandemic and through this pandemic. So we thought it would be beneficial for committee and for the public to have an appreciation as to the level of financial commitment from senior levels of government towards our community during this pandemic. As well, we had committed to, and we're providing a preliminary, and I'll just focus on the word preliminary, 2020 year-end forecast. This information will formally be brought to committee, I believe, the 3rd week of April, and these are very early days as it relates to our 2020 year-end position. So again, we are meeting committee's expectation as it relates to providing that information, with the caveat that these are still early days and these numbers may and will likely change before they are formally brought forward to committee in April. As well as we thought it was important to look forward in terms of what staff see as it relates to our 2022 budget outlook, and so we have some content as it relates to 2022. And finally, again, just a reminder, this is our last scheduled budget GIC, and it's the 2021 budget is scheduled to go before council on March 31st. You would have seen this table last week when we provided an update as to our current tax position, residential tax position. I made reference to staff have had the opportunity over the last number of days to take all of the amendments and to update our taxation model, and you'll see a slight change from our previous position of 2.2%, and it's not as a result of any further amendments, but simply the opportunity for staff to take all that information and to formally update our taxation model. So we currently sit at a residential tax increase of 2.1%. And again, that is reflective of all the previous amendments of committee by committee. And you can see the breakdown of that 2.1% by city departments, boards and agencies, as well as capital financing. And just a reminder that the 2.1% includes education. So 2.1% for a household with an assessed value of $380,000 would represent an increase of approximately $89. Just as I had mentioned previously, we have not come before council with respect to the funding commitments from senior levels of government previously. So we felt it was an opportunity to make committee aware and the community aware of the financial commitments from senior levels of government. You'll see that we've tried to organize these commitments according to program areas. I'll start with transit. To date, we've had a overall commitment of approximately $52 million in funding towards offsetting not only additional expenditures as it relates to transit, but foregone revenues. I'll note that there was a recent announcement, as recent, I believe, of this week, as it relates to a commitment towards Hamilton for 2021. It's my assumption that that commitment is reflected in the $34.5 million that's represented as phase 2 of transit, but we'll await formal communication from the minister as it relates to the most recent transit commitment. So again, approximately $52 million has been committed to date to see the city through our transit pressures. And just as a reminder to committee members that the $52 million was a commitment that sees us through to March 31st of 2021. So again, we're anxiously awaiting some formal communication as it relates to this week's announcement by MPP Scully regarding a commitment for the period ending December 31st of 2021. As well, you may recall that there was previously a commitment to the City of Hamilton about $48 million for municipal restart, and you'll see that reflected under general municipal, as well as a commitment of approximately $7.4 million for ICIP COVID-19 resilient infrastructure projects, capital projects. And just as a reminder, the city has submitted applications for those projects, and I believe we are awaiting commitments from senior levels of government towards those projects. Those projects included some funding for our counters, as well as funding for active transportation. So again, the $7.4 million the city has an ask into senior levels of government, and I believe we are just awaiting approval on our application. Housing services, again, you'll note that the text in red represents infrastructure capital funding. There was a commitment to approximately just short of $11 million for Rapid Housing Initiative. And again, that application has gone forward, and the balance of about $35 million represents funding to support housing and shelters and the additional expenditures required in order to support our vulnerable population during this pandemic. Continuing on, you'll note that under public health and emergency services, there were a series of commitments, not only towards public health, but towards paramedics, as well as towards nurses initiatives in support of our school board partners. In total, those commitments represent approximately $14 million. And finally, there were a series of other social services related commitments, including for long-term care and some temporary wage enhancement, pandemic pay, and finally towards children's services. And that represents an additional $12 million. So you'll see at the bottom the significant investment or commitment from senior levels of government towards the City of Hamilton during this pandemic period, totaling approximately $170 million, just short of $170.5 million. So again, wanting to recognize senior levels of government and their support towards municipalities in general, but especially towards the City of Hamilton during this pandemic period. And as it relates to the 2.1%, again, you'll recall this slide from last week. We just wanted to provide that update. We continue to sit at the lower end of our comparator groups. We are fourth as it relates to this comparator group, and you can see that 2021 represents residential tax increases ranging from 1% to 3.4% in our comparator group. I'll take a few minutes to go through this information. Appreciate it's the first time you've seen this information again. I'll caveat that this is preliminary information and that city staff will be reporting formally, I believe, March or April 21st or thereabouts through the disposition of our 2020 year-end position. I appreciate it's a busy table, so I'll take some time through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, to walk committee members through the table. You'll see that that middle column starts off with the 2020 approved budget, as well as our preliminary 2020 year-end actuals, forecasted actuals, and then finally our 2020 forecasted variance. And I'll focus on that middle column and those three columns. The first subtotal there really captures city programs. You'll see that city programs had a approved budget of about $562 million. And you'll see that our actuals in 2020, our forecasted actuals, are approximately $580 million, $800,000 for a deficit, a forecasted deficit of approximately $18.5 million. The forecasted deficit is principally driven by COVID, and I'll try to break it down a bit in terms of all the ins and outs pertaining to COVID. The $18.5 million in parts driven by additional expenses for public health, paramedic services, housing, long-term care, children's services, as well as social programming. Just related to COVID-19, those programs experienced deficits, additional expenditures of approximately $38 million. And committee will be familiar that the pandemic not only affected the need for additional investments, but that the city realized some foregone revenues as a result of the pandemic. And those foregone revenues would have been represented by a declining ridership in transit, so some transit foregone revenues, recreation, provincial.
Mike, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. The presentation that I was provided is very different than the one you're using. So the councillors are looking at different slides online than what you have or that's in EDRMS. So I'm just going to advise all councillors to maybe look at their screen rather than what's in eScribe. And then I will get the proper presentation from staff after the meeting. Thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Stephanie. Sorry for that. I know the one amendment we made was the comparator slide, and I'm hoping I'm using the last presentation and that we have the latest figures, and I'm sure Brian or someone will advise me differently if I pulled up the wrong presentation. But I'll just continue on, and staff will advise me if I've erred and pulled up the wrong presentation. So just continuing on as it relates to the revenue impacts tied to COVID-19, again, we are forecasting approximately $55 million in revenue loss tied to transit recreation programs that were paused or ceased because of the pandemic. Our Provincial Offences Act revenues, some declines in realized revenues, as well as a decline of about 80% in our slot revenues that we share with OLG tied to Flamborough Downs, as well as parking, foregone parking revenues, and finally some additional municipal service revenues. So overall, the financial impact that we are forecasting tied to COVID-19 was an impact of about $93 million. And again, that's represented by approximately $38 million in additional expenditures and approximately $55 million in foregone revenues. Now, offsetting the additional expenditures and foregone revenues are a series of savings and avoided costs tied to a number of programs or expenditure categories. Because of that pandemic, a number of our facilities and programs were paused, and that resulted in not only facility related savings and as it relates to utilities, or in some cases fuel as it relates to vehicles, but as well as employee related savings in that some of those employees were redeployed to other services in support of responding to the pandemic, and those employee related costs might have been offset through funding from senior levels of government. There was a series of discretionary spending controls that the senior leadership team implemented in the early days of the pandemic, and those discretionary spending controls are as well contributing to our savings and avoided costs. Committee members will recall, principally because of the pandemic, the need to temporarily suspend part-time student and seasonal employee scheduling, and that too is contributing to offsetting our COVID-related pressures, costs. As well, there were some additional controls on hiring of staff and resulting in some additional gapping over and above what council set as a target. Not related to the pandemic, we did see some savings in winter control, and we are forecasting that as a contributing factor to offsetting our COVID pressures. There were some DARTS contract savings, and as those clients were not able to fully subscribe to the service, that resulted in some savings. And finally, there's approximately $5.5 million in capital financing, again, not related to COVID, principally driven by lower cost to borrow and a difference in what we assumed as it relates to issuing debt for capital projects that are substantially complete. So just wanting to categorize some of the areas where we realize savings and avoided costs that effectively are contributing to what still is a deficit, program deficit of approximately $18.5 million, but which would have been much greater had we not realized these savings and had we not implemented some controls in the early days of this pandemic to try to mitigate the financial impact as it relates to COVID-19. I'll move on now in this table and speak to some of the COVID emergency funding that we're currently reflecting in our 2020 year-end forecast. You'll see that the first column is titled Other Sources, and this again is still federal and provincial funding. This is principally the Social Services Relief Fund, as well as funding for public health, housing, and the social services in general. And currently we're reflecting just short of $29 million federal and provincial funding as it relates to our response to the pandemic. Public Works, the $464,000 is, I believe, the deep clean funding for transit services. So approximately $29.5 million of COVID-related funding from senior levels of government that we are reflecting towards our 2020 forecasted year-end. Further along, there was some dedicated federal and provincial funding tied to what's referred to as Restart. That's a formal agreement with senior levels of government and municipalities. You'll see that we are drawing approximately $3.4 million for planning economic development. That's principally to offset the foregone parking revenues. Public Works, approximately $12.2 million, and that is tied to the transit restart funding, and that is to offset the additional expenditures and the foregone revenues in transit. Corporate financials, approximately $1.8 million. Non-program revenues, approximately $8 million, and that is principally the foregone slot revenues that we share with Ontario Gaming Authority, as well as some foregone dividend as it relates to Electra that is tied to the pandemic. And finally, under Hamilton Entertainment Facilities, approximately $1.4 million in contractual obligations that we have with the operators of those facilities. Moving on, you'll see that we're reflecting in our current forecast approximately $562,000 for Hamilton Police Services. That's tied to the cost of PPE. And under other boards and agencies, approximately $145,000. That's tied to additional cleaning costs in response to the pandemic, for a total of approximately $27 million in Safe Restart funding. So in total, you'll see that we are assuming draws of approximately 29 plus $27.6 million. So total approximately $57 million in federal and provincial funding. And moving over to the far right column, you'll see that by drawing approximately $57 million in eligible costs tied to COVID-19, that puts the city of Hamilton at a forecasted 2020 surplus of approximately $49 million. And I'll try to explain that surplus relative to where we sat in a preliminary, in our last variance reports to committee members and council, as well as to our historical year-end performance. The $49 million, if you recall at our last report to committee as it relates to variance, we were forecasting a $12 million surplus, our last variance report. And what wasn't captured in that $12 million surplus was you'll see under boards and agencies here, under Hamilton Police Services, Hamilton Public Library, they are forecasting a total surplus of approximately $5 million, $1.6 million for Hamilton Police Services. That represents approximately 1%. And Hamilton Public Library, because of the disruption and delivery of their programs, they are forecasting a surplus of approximately 10% or $3.3 million. So again, in our last update forecast to council as it relates to our variance forecast for 2020, the $5 million surplus for those two agencies was not reflected in that $12 million. As well as you'll see on this table, I spoke to the Safe Restart funding that draw approximately $27 million in Safe Restart funding. That again was not assumed in our $12 million variance forecast. So just including the 12 million plus the 5 million for boards and agencies and the $27 million in draws from the restart funding, that puts us at a figure of approximately $44 million, which gets us relatively close to the forecasted 2020 year end that's before you this morning. I should note as well, while we're focused on the tax supported program, when the final report comes before committee in April, we will include our rate supported program, our current forecast, revised forecast for 2020. We are reflecting a deficit of approximately $4.5 million. That's a swing of about $5.5 million from our last variance report, where we were projecting a surplus of $1 million. And there'll be greater detail through the April report. So again, appreciate the $49 million represents a significant value. And while it is different from our last 2 years, year-end positions in 2019 and in 2018, in each of those years, we had a corporate surplus of approximately $25 million in each of those years. 2017, we had a corporate surplus of $43 million. And finally, in 2016, we had a corporate surplus, year-end surplus of $30 million. So again, while we've traditionally had surpluses in each year, and while 2020 is a very different year in terms of what is driving the surpluses, again, just wanting to identify that traditionally we've had surpluses in that 2 to 5% range, as high as 5% in 2017, and this just short of $49 million projected surplus would represent a surplus of approximately 5%. So just moving on, I appreciate there was a lot of information in that table to take committee through. Just moving on as it relates to the financial commitments towards the city, you'll see that by drawing approximately $57 million in federal provincial funding, that leaves funds available of approximately $111 million. And I just want to draw your attention to the first bullet point below this table, is that a majority of these funds, in fact, expire in the next 29 days. And for that reason, it's important that municipalities continue to work with senior levels of government in securing extensions to these commitments, not only for 2021, but you'll see through this presentation this morning that staff are continuing to project COVID-19 impacts well into 2022. And so the need continues to be there from senior levels of government to help municipalities, including the City of Hamilton, to manage the current pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic well into 2022, and in some program areas potentially beyond 2022. So just wanting to draw your attention that while there continues to be committed funds that we are not leveraging, forecasting to leverage for 2020, that a significant portion of these funds will expire again by the end of this month. The funds that continue to be available to us, I'll just go back through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, if that's okay. I'll just go back to this table. The $70 million is principally comprised of some assumptions with respect to the transit phase 2 restart funding, while formally that is set to expire on March 31st. Based on MPP Scully's news release this week, we're hopeful that a significant portion of that will extend to the end of the calendar year, and as well approximately $30 million of the general municipal safe restart funding agreement we are not leveraging for 2020, and that funding is available to municipalities right through to the end of December of 2021. So again, those continue to be funds to help us through the pandemic in 2021. And just as a reminder to committee members, as it relates to 2021, staff are currently forecasting COVID-19 financial impacts in 2021 of approximately $60 million. So again, based on our preliminary forecast for 2020, it was approximately $93 million in impacts. And for 2021, we're projecting an additional $60 million in financial impacts tied to the pandemic.
Thank you, Mike, for that overview, and thank you also to everybody on your team in Finance and Corporate Services for pulling this information together, echoing also your acknowledgement of senior orders of government for an investment of $170 million to the City of Hamilton related to COVID costs. Thank you for your presentation. We'll open it up for questions from councillors. I know that Councillor Clark is on the speakers list. General Manager Zegeric, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah. Sorry. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I think I must have paused too long because
my
I might have suggested the end of my presentation.
My sincere apologies.
Or maybe you're getting signals from committee members that they've heard enough and they're wanting me to stop presenting, but I just have 2 more slides to take you through. One is the 2022 forecast. So we thought we would just, it was relevant to bring to committee members' attention some of the pressures we see going into 2022. And so I'll just quickly take committee members through this slide. You'll see that for 2022, city departments are forecasting pressures of approximately 4.7%, and that's principally tied to collective agreements, contractual pressures, as well as inflationary pressures. Year 6 of the 10-year transit strategy is incorporated in that 4.7%, as well as a inflationary adjustment for DARTs. As a reminder, the provincial government, I believe in 2017, started to amend the cost sharing ratios for public health and child services, and those impacts are as well reflected in that 4.7%. Boards and agencies, we're applying previous guidelines for boards and agencies, and that would represent a 2.7% increase. The capital financing 4.1% is the 0.5% traditional capital levy increase. And finally, there were a series of amendments that were approved by committee that is pending council's approval of 21 budget that when annualized will represent an additional impact in 2022 of about $2.8 million. So you can see as it relates to city departments, boards, agencies, capital financing, annualization of some 2021 enhancements is we are forecasting a position of 4.4%. As in previous years, we do benefit from assessment growth, and we are continuing to budget for approximately 1% benefit of assessment growth. You'll see impact of levy restrictions. I'm making an assumption, and we'll learn in the coming weeks. I expect no later than possibly May or June, whether or not 2022 will represent a reassessment period. If it were to represent a reassessment period, we are just budgeting for approximately a 0.5% shift onto residential because of a reassessment, similar to what we experienced in the 2016 to 2020 period. Or sorry, 2017 to 2020 period. Education, you would have seen today's presentation, earlier presentations, education tax rate relief of approximately 0.3%. So inclusive of assessment, some levy restriction shifts, and education, we would be sitting at a preliminary forecast for 2022 of a 3.6% residential increase. Now, over and above what we might experience in a normal year is city staff are forecasting continued COVID-19 impacts of approximately $58 million well into 2022. And this represents not only additional expenditures, but some foregone revenues. So again, this includes transit, approximately $12 million in foregone revenues that we're estimating. Parking revenues, foregone revenues, approximately $3 million. Slot revenues of approximately $2.6 million. Foregone POA revenues, approximately $1.8 million. And then additional pressures in paramedic services, approximately $1.8 million. Children's services, $4.5 million. Housing, approximately $13.5 million. Long-term care, approximately $3.5 million. And finally, public health, approximately $15 million. Again, these are preliminary forecasts. These will change, but we just thought it was important to bring to the attention of committee and the community that COVID-19 will contribute to continue to have impacts for municipalities well beyond 2021 into 2022. In fact, beyond 2022 as it relates to some program areas. So again, based on the impacts to city departments, boards and agencies with some ins and outs related to assessment and education, we would be sitting at a 3.6%. Somewhat favorable relative to previous years. We would have been sitting closer to a 4.5% outlook, but the COVID-19 impacts represent a significant risk. And as I mentioned in the earlier slide, a number of the commitments from senior levels of government are expiring at the end of March. So not only do we need some certainty as it relates to 2021, it's also critical that senior levels of government message to municipalities as to what their commitment will be towards municipalities as it relates to sharing some of the COVID-19 financial impacts into 2022. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that really represents the end of my presentation. So I will pause. I'll just, again, thank committee members, thank staff, thank Stephanie for her patience, and apologize if I've erred in pulling up a presentation, and if I've done so, we'll be sure to send you the final version of it. But again, this represents the last scheduled budget GIC and is set to go to council for approval on March 31st. So once again, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, thank you to committee members, and thank you to senior leadership team and to my team and to Stephanie for all their coordination and for their assistance towards not only committee, but towards me through this budget process.
Thank you so much, General Manager Zegarac, and my apologies again for interrupting you. I did read your pause as a completion, and that was my error. Just going to say ditto to the comments I said in that little gap and open up the floor for questions. First, we have Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Ferguson, and then Councillor Collins. Councillor Clark, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. Just two questions. One is on page 2 of 7 in the report that's before us. Item D4 says a line of duty death benefit reserve be established with initial funding of 494,000, et cetera, et cetera. I'm having brain fog this morning, Mr. Zagaric, because I don't recall anything about this, so I may have missed it in all of the briefing notes. Can you just summarize for me?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, there have been I believe, a series of reports over the years that HR has brought forward with respect. I believe this is tied to Hamilton Fire Services and some liabilities the municipality has and some obligations going forward as it relates to line of duty benefits and financial costs. And I'm not sure if Laura is on our call today, if she can expand as to where that has been tradition. I see Brian McMullen's joined us in terms of, and maybe I'll turn to Brian McMullen, our Director of Financial Planning and Policy, as to some of the details behind that figure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so so through the chair, the line of duty death benefit costs, hit traditionally. There were some instances where it came up where we had to, go into camera about some line of duty death benefit payments that were required for the fire service, and they were not budgeted items, so we were funding them from the WSIB reserve that we have set aside. So a couple of years back, we decided that we should be adding an item into the fire department budget as a for the payments, and at the same time, during last year's 2020 budget discussions, when we reduced Healthy and Safe Communities Services budget, fire in particular, we reduced their budget last year, and we had written in our documents that we were then going to establish a line of duty death benefit reserve, and we didn't officially do that through any recommendation in a committee report. So in order to do that, we have it added into this year's budget report. So consequently, last year's year-end surplus and related to the line of duty death benefit expense that would have been budgeted in fire would have went to the tax stabilization reserve as part of our year-end surplus disposition that we would have taken to committee last April. So that money would then be moved into the line of duty death benefit reserve that is now being established with one of the recommendations today. So part of it was the reduction that we had last year in the 2020 budget to get down to our approved budget in 2020.
So,
Thank you, Councilor.
Deputy Mayor, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Is there a corresponding policy on how line of duty death benefits are calculated or distributed or any of that?
So through the chair, so the line of duty death benefit, that information would come through Human Resources as far as how those calculations are come and how they're derived and the awards that are made related to the line of duty death benefits, and they would then be expensed to the fire department budget in the future. I don't know if Laura Fontana has any more information on line of duty death benefits in general, though.
So, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm just asking if there is a policy that I can see, because I'm not familiar with this.
Thank you. And is Laura on the call? Director Fontana? No, she's not on the call. So we will request that staff share that policy and have it emailed out. If it's possible to do so during this GIC meeting, that will happen. Otherwise, it'll happen afterwards. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Were there any further questions? Yeah, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, and thank you. And I'd like on that policy when it was approved by council, if I can have that also. My second question, if I may, I guess third question now. We're at 2.1%, Mr. Zagaric. Our goal was 2%. What options do we have to get to that 2%? What would that 0.1% represent in dollars?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, maybe I'll start with the last question I heard there. To achieve a 2% residential tax increase, it would require each 2% represents now $10.5 million inclusive of education. So it would be just in excess of $1 million in further savings. Again, we have fully incorporated now in education, assessment growth, all of the amendments that the committee have gone through to further reduce the budget or the residential tax increase down to 2%. I would be looking to committee members for some direction as to which areas, services to look at. It would not be my recommendation to draw on reserves. I appreciate the new information around 2020 year-end forecasted year-end surplus. I would just caution committee members from drawing from reserves as a surplus is a one-time funding source, and reserves, contributions from reserves typically are not sustainable and would result in future tax increases, and recognizing the uncertainty going into 2022 and the uncertainty as it relates to COVID pressures and continued commitments from senior levels of government. It would not be my recommendation to committee that we draw on reserves to achieve a 2% overall tax increase, but rather that we look at amending service levels if that was the direction of committee.
And the surplus for 2020 stands at what now?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the forecast is just short of $49 million, and we will come before committee, I believe, the third week of April, at which time we'll provide some recommendations, recognizing we have some liabilities that staff will likely put forward to committee when that report comes forward. We have a number of infrastructure-related liabilities, principally our development charge exemptions that, based on our 2020 experience, the exemptions far exceeded the budget for 2020. So that would represent a potential recommendation to committee to address the development charge exemption gap, as well as an opportunity to invest into a COVID-19 reserve, given that you might recall from my presentation that a number of the programs tied to social services, and this includes housing, public health, those financial commitments expire at the end of March with no commitments beyond the end of this month. And it would be prudent to set aside some funds to assure some funding to assist the municipality with that uncertainty through the balance of 2021. And as you would have seen in the presentation, is the COVID-19 impacts we're forecasting to continue well into 2022. And again, there has been no messaging from senior levels of government towards sustainable COVID-19 financial funds or financial commitments to assist municipalities into 2022.
So last question, why couldn't we take $1 million out of that $49 million surplus to get to our goal of 2%, given that the $49 million surplus, arguably, we overcharge residents on their taxes. I know we saved money, but we've charged them more than we actually required to pay out in 2020. So why couldn't we use that to lower their tax hit this year?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that is an option. If committee wants suggest the mechanics would be drawing from the tax stabilization reserve, because we won't actually realize the year-end surplus until the end of April. So you would draw from the tax stabilization reserve. I only caution by doing so, it would require either a commitment in future years, each and every year, of $1 million draw from future years, assuming that we continue to have surpluses in future years, or a slight increase in, or an increase of an additional 0.1 in 2022 to offset that draw from reserves. So if the intent was to do it as a one-time, you would draw from reserves, $1 million from reserve to reduce the tax impact in 2021, and then offset that with an additional 0.1% tax increase in 2022. So again, that is an option of committee. And I'll just once again highlight the uncertainty as it relates to funding commitments beyond the period of March, and that continues to be a risk to us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Thank you, General Manager Garrick. Moving on to Councillor Ferguson, please. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. And Mike, I just want to congratulate you and your staff again for such a thorough budget. I can't remember being done in early March before. If we, in fact, get it done today, it's tempting to go to 2 more meetings because you seem to go down 0.1 every meeting. And that could get us down to a 1.9% increase if we just sort of stalled it out a bit. But I'm saying that facetiously to be smart, Mike. But the best part of it is the budget gets easier and easier to understand every year. I had no trouble at all following every slide, following every presentation that you made because you put it in a form that's not only accountants can understand. And so it was very easy to follow. So you and Brian and the others have done an amazing job of doing that to help us fully understand it. So congratulations on that. And, 2.1 is getting close. I always felt this is going to be my first year ever in my 14 years on council is that I would oppose the budget because I just wasn't happy with 2 categories. One, and believe me, I do not support defunding police, but it just bothers me that every department in our organization, most in the boards and agencies, all the big boards and agencies, all come in and met or below the target. Even fire, who is very high employee cost, as is planning and other areas. And the fact that they come in at 2.9% rather than meet our target just this year because of the pandemic, I found incredibly disappointing. I thought they would find something somewhere to be able to do that. And I would still like to see that. I just think that, with all this attention on Black Lives Matter and defund police, that they would have come in at something closer to the city guideline of 2%. And believe me, I spent 5 years as chair of the board. I understand that 90% is employee cost, but they can find a way to get that down to 2% and just send a message that their team players are on with us and they understand the pandemic issues and what our taxpayers are facing, but particularly those in the travel, retail, and hospitality business. The other one is the ambulance. We've put 60 more paramedics on with the last 6 ambulances for the the last 5 years. I remember in 2006 we added 60 more paramedics, and I just can't find the bottom here. And we added those paramedics. We were convinced by the chief to add those over the last few years because of the serious problems with offloading and code zeros, and our paramedic service in the hospitals have done an outstanding job of getting that down. Well, I think I never put it in calculator, but it's got to be something order 75% that they're down in these areas. But now they're still asking for another 10 because they're saying that calls for service, although they went down in the spring, are up now. But with this offloading problem, a significant part of it has been resolved. Those ambulances should be available to handle more calls, and that's another $1.2 million. And I'm focusing into those 2 areas because of the 2 big numbers. 7% for paramedic and 2.9% for police. And the 7% for paramedics, most of that is these 10 new paramedics for that 1 new ambulance. And I recognize that the ambulance itself is paid for other development charges because it's growth related. And so those are the 2 areas I'm having trouble with. I really hope we could get down to 1.9%. I have a lot of my constituents who are not employed if they're working those 3 categories. I haven't seen any relief come for the public who have lost their jobs as temporarily. They're laid off, around the airline, travel, and retail business, who have lost their jobs because of COVID-19. So while we've had our impacts, but the senior levels of government have been amazing in helping us get through it, nobody's helping them. And I had one lady write me, and I talked to Mike about this. I don't know where she's employed in, but I got the sense it was one of those categories. And they wanted some relief from the interest rate if they're late on their tax bill, because we're charging, I believe, is 1% per month, which is 12% per year. For interest rates, and there's no relief for any. If you're in any of those 3 categories, or if you've lost your job as a result of COVID, we're not. Nothing's come through in this budget process about offering relief to the interest costs if they're late. And I know we did that last year. We allowed an extension of time to pay their bills. I haven't seen the stats on that. Maybe Mike, you can comment, but I haven't seen the stats. But I suspect there wasn't a lot of people that took advantage of that. But I know young people with the cost of housing nowadays. I remember when
Councillor
the house I'm in.
That's your 5 minutes, so I'll pause you there. You did ask a question to General Manager Zager. Could you just clarify your question again so he can respond?
I don't know. I was just about at the end now. I've lost my train of thought.
I apologize for interrupting you, but
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I believe the councillor's question was as it relates to our experience on property owners drawing on the waiving of penalty and interest during a period of the pandemic. I believe the impact was approximately $800,000 in foregone penalty and interest. And what we're seeing, and this will come before audit, finance, and admin, maybe somewhat surprising trends as it relates to arrears. Our arrears have actually dropped in 2020 relative to previous years across all classes. And while they're for the most part across all wards, I believe there were 2 wards. And again, that report will come before audit, finance, and admin on April 25th. So again, some positive updates to the arrears trends. In that 2020, we actually saw a decline in property tax arrears in 2020 relative to 2019 and previous years.
thank you for the response. Councillor Ferguson, if you had further questions, I'll put you down for a second time. And just a reminder to my council colleagues that I'm timing it based on the airtime you take and not the airtime for the response of the question. Moving on to Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Proceed.
Perfect. Thank you. Through you to Mike. Mike, I really appreciate all of that you and your staff have done, and certainly senior leadership team as well, in terms of getting us to where we are today. And I think it bears repeating in terms of our praise of both levels of government in terms of the assistance they've provided. You've emphasized that in past meetings, and you've reiterated again here today in terms of the assistance that has come from both the federal government and provincial governments. And I wanted to highlight that again today. We're often critical, as I said in the past, when they're not there to assist us. And I think we need to be, we need to highlight, those instances where they have been there for Hamilton and our residents. And they've certainly done that over the past year during very, very difficult times. So with that out of the way, Madam Chairman, there are a couple of things, Mike, that I didn't hear as part of your presentation. And I know that you mentioned that there's still some uncertainty as we make our way through 2021 with the pandemic and the impact that it will have on city operations. I know that at the at City Housing Board, our arrears have gone up from, I think, on average 14 or 15%. We're at 34% arrears now. There will be a cost to the organization as it relates to the payback time that the Landlord Tenant Board provides tenants as it relates to, I'm hearing now, 18 months, 2 years that some people are being given to pay those arrears. And then, of course, there's the whole rent freeze that's had a tremendous impact. I think it's about $1 million plus per year for as long as the rent freeze is in place. And so if the freeze is extended through 2021, there will be a corresponding budget hit to City Housing Hamilton as well. And those budget hits essentially come out of maintenance. There's not a lot of there are not a lot of discretionary areas for City Housing to look at as it relates to making up for those shortfalls. So it wasn't part of your presentation. I do know that finance staff is aware of it, and I know that you're speaking to our surplus today, which is something that's always on our radar screen at this time of year. But as it relates to coming up with a game plan for those issues and others, is that something that the reserve that you just mentioned would address over the next couple of months leading up to the spring months? And can you just disclose how we'll address that corporately, both at CHH, and we've disclosed that through our budget process, and then through the city's budget process, because as you know, we are the shareholders of those units. Thank you.
So for you, Madam Deputy Mayor, maybe I'll break down my response according to the 2 issues the councillors identified. One is being higher arrears as it relates to the pandemic, and the second being the restriction, I'll call it the benchmarking restriction, the restriction to increase rents for not only City Housing Hamilton, but all housing providers. On the issue of arrears, we will be dealing with that, Councillor, in the coming weeks. City Housing Hamilton, as a agency of the City of Hamilton, is actually reflected in our financial statements, and as a result, they are eligible for restart funding as well. And if we can defend that the arrears, the incidents of arrears or incidents of arrears were further may create further challenges as a result of the pandemic, it may form part of our claim against the restart funding, which is due to the province the end of March. So on the first issue of arrears, it will be weeks, not months, that we will have to deal with the arrears issue. On the issue with respect to the restrictions of increasing rents for housing providers, we'll have to work with City Housing Hamilton as it relates to how they prepared their 2021 budget. If they prepared their 2021 budget to reflect that restriction, so reflecting a reduction in revenue generation, then we will have to have a discussion in year if they experience a forecasted deficit, whether or not the financial impacts of that restriction may be eligible for provincial funding in 2021. And there would be, I would just caveat that it would be subject to federal provincial governments extending these programs beyond March 31st of 2021. And as well, whether or not the city could defend the position that the restriction, which I recall, the news release from the provincial government was tied to COVID-19, which would help us as it relates to defending the position that it's tied to the pandemic. So that may provide relief for 2021, Councillor, as it relates to the issue of rate restrictions, increase in rental rate restrictions. However, we're going to have to work with City Housing Hamilton towards a longer term solution. So while there may be opportunities to offset the arrears and the rate restrictions in 2020 and 2021, I would assume those funding streams will come to an end. They will exhaust at some point from federal provincial governments, which would require either additional commitments from the shareholder, the city, through levy increases, or through some other form of mitigation measure. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I appreciate that was a long answer, but I'm hoping that I answered the two components to that question.
You did, Mike. Thank you for that. And my last question would be, in terms of drawing on the reserve again, you're recommending against that for the purposes of taking down the tax rate, because essentially you're forced to find those savings, whether it's next year or future years, and that would have a negative impact on the reserve, just to be clear.
Yeah, so specific through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, specific to the housing issues, I wouldn't recommend drawing from reserves because there could be offsets as it relates to restart funding. On the broader issue of drawing from the reserve, yes. The one challenge would be reserve may be a time-limited option, which would require future tax increases, and recognizing we're in a relatively competitive position at 2.1% relative to our other municipalities, recognizing that each individual is facing unique challenges within the municipality. But looking forward, again, we see significant pressures in 2021 without firm commitments from senior levels of government towards sharing of those COVID pressures for the balance of this year. And as well as we're seeing, you'll see in today's presentation, you would have seen forecasted pressures in 2022. And obviously, we haven't received commitments for 2022 from senior levels of government, nor have we heard any messaging as it relates to future commitments. So again, the COVID-19 impacts represent real pressures to the municipality. And I would hope we would receive some formal commitments from senior levels of government sometime soon as relates to 2021, and maybe some messaging as it relates to 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. And before we move to Mayor Eisenberger, I understand that Director Fontana is on the call. And thank you also to Clerk Paparella for forwarding the documents related to the previous question in terms of line of duty benefits. Laura?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I understand the question correctly, following the passing of provincial legislation that links specific cancers to the performance of firefighting duties, a list of cancers was determined to be work-related and thereby entitling such employees as firefighters to WSIB compensation and accidental death and dismemberment benefits. The AD&D coverage, as it's known, was included in the Hamilton Firefighters Collective Agreement in 1995. So it would have been ratified by council at that time. The language for council's benefit states that benefits under the plan shall be equal to 2 times the employee's annual wage, basic wage rate to the nearest $1,000 in the event that a member passes away and his or her claim is accepted by the WSIB as compensable. The applicable benefit, as noted, shall be paid out to the nearest $1,000. After a claim has been approved or accepted by the WSIB, the association has 1 year to file the claim. So if I understand council's question, there's no policy per se, but it is in the collective agreement, and we're bound to the collective agreement as of ratification, and I believe it was in 1995 or 1985, excuse me.
Thank you so much, Director Fontana. And I will proceed to Mayor Eisenberger. If Councillor Clark has any follow-up questions, he can indicate for a second time speaking. Thank you. Mayor Eisenberger, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you, Mike. You know what, we are blessed with a fantastic financial team that I think always provides us wonderful advice on how we structure our finances and clear and concise presentations in terms of where all the money goes. I think we've been well served by Mike's leadership and the leadership of the entire team. So very grateful, and grateful for Stephanie's iron fist rule of our budget process, which I truly appreciate in terms of keeping us straight on our process. Really much appreciated. I think Stephanie's one of our finance clerks as well. So we've been well served through this budget process. Just on to touch on a couple of things, and I did. Councillor Ferguson touched on policing, and I understand that it doesn't win favor with everyone. We had a very thorough budget process at Police Services, and certainly we wouldn't be asking for this if it wasn't necessary in the current circumstances. And again, defunding police or having a conversation around alternate ways of delivering services in the community to provide better outcomes is being handled through the Community Safety and Wellness Plan, which I expect will hopefully come forward with some suggestions in terms of how that might happen, and that may very well reflect on the policing budget going forward. But on the other hand, I would say that the demand for policing continues to increase from council, quite frankly. Asking consistently for more traffic control, which we actually responded to in a significant way, to set up a traffic control unit. From every area of our city is concerned predominantly around traffic control, and of course a lot of other policing issues while we're at it. Secondarily, the increase in that police budget, part of it is being driven by the new forensic building, which all fine and well, we got through the capital piece. There's also an operating and a fit up of that facility that happens to land in this year, which was very nicely championed by the former chair, Councillor Ferguson, who put the apparatus together to get us a new forensic building. Very necessary, very critical to future investigations and ensuring that our courts have clear, clean evidence that they can use to convict criminals in our community. So very important investment. But there's a cost to fitting it up and operating that facility, and that certainly lands in this kind of current budget year as well. So I'm quite content with the police services budget and the way we've gotten through a very thorough process there, and I look forward to future discussions on where policing goes in the future through that I think very important exercise. And lastly, Mike, to the issue of surplus, and I know that's it's a bit of an eye-popping number, although we've had surpluses like this in the past. The challenge is that should we tap into this surplus in a significant way, we may be shortchanging ourselves in terms of future federal funding, because this is all COVID related, predominantly COVID related surplus that should be utilized for offsetting COVID related expenses either now or next year. So my sense of it, Mike, is that we're hanging on to that as an insurance policy in case we don't get everything that we need in 2021 and or in 2022. So could you address that for us, please? Because I think that's an important issue. We're blessed with I think the great advocacy work that mayors across the country have done to encourage our federal and provincial governments to bring forward significant resources. And this is only Hamilton, so you can only imagine the many billions of dollars that have gone out across the country. I'd say to be fair, 80% of it is federal money, 20% is provincial money. And they've made huge strides to try and do as much as possible to keep municipalities whole, to understand and appreciate that economic recovery is not well served if our municipalities are wallowing in massive amounts of debt and have to be cutting services and employees and employment all over the place. So they've recognized that, and they've come to the table with significant dollars. May not be enough for everything, but certainly it's been significant. So that surplus that we're talking about surely needs to be held on to ensure that if we don't get everything we need, if they don't come through in the same manner as they have in the past, that we at least have a surplus or a reserve, COVID reserve, that we can turn to help offset that as a bit of an insurance policy. So that was a long rhetorical question. I'll let you get
With
to the
20
answer.
seconds to spare, Mayor. General Manager Zagarek, please.
I'll let you get to the answer, Mike, and thank you again for all the great work.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, maybe I'll spend a little time on the question. It is a great question, and maybe I glanced too quickly on slide number 8, which spoke to the forecasted surplus. To the Mayor's comment regarding the driving factor to the surplus, absolutely. The federal provincial funding, approximately $57 million, is obviously contributing towards the surplus, notwithstanding the federal and provincial funding. If this were to be a normal year, I expect we would have had some surpluses because of our capital financing. Traditionally, we have a capital financing surplus, and you'll see on the slide of the surplus that's represented by about $5.5 million. We would have continued to have some gapping surpluses. Winter control was very favorable because of the winter we had in 2020, and fire had a surplus in 2020. So notwithstanding the restart funding, I expect that we would have still had a surplus. Maybe not to the magnitude that you see before you. And I'll focus a bit on the magnitude because this number could change subject to the scenario or approach committee and council ultimately supports as it relates to drawing from restart funding. So again, as a reminder, in this slide is approximately $57 million in provincial and federal funding. The alternative approach that I could have brought before committee is to reduce that draw on federal and provincial funding to balance our 2020 year-end position. And that would effectively return some federal and provincial funding back to senior levels of government with the hope that they will be there for us in 2021. My concern is that the commitments and a number of these programs we have expire at the end of this month. And not knowing if those commitments will be extended, what I presented to you is a scenario with a higher level of certainty whereby we would realize those recoveries from federal provincial funding, which are completely legitimate and eligible in that they're tied to additional expenses or financial impact from foregone revenues. So again, the scenario that you have before you is drawing on those funding commitments, resulting in a surplus with a preliminary expectation that a portion of that would be set aside. You'll recall, committee members, that we established a COVID-19 reserve in 2020 and we did some initial steps early in the pandemic to set aside some funds. So again, there's an opportunity in April when that report comes before committee for council to continue that practice and set aside some funds to help us through 2021, as well as potentially in 2022. So again, in summary, I appreciate that this may be a little detailed, but in summary, you have a scenario before you that leverages funding to secure some certainty as it relates to funds to help us through 2021. The alternative would be to reduce our reliance on provincial federal funding, resulting in a much lower surplus with the hope that federal and provincial governments will continue to be there for us in 2021. And finally, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I've learned that hope isn't a strategy. So again, we put forward a strategy to you that builds some assurance.
Thank you, and I heard 20 seconds left. So let me just appreciate that strategy, because I think it's important for us to put it in the right context, and I think it's a very wise approach because we need to look at these as we have done in the past on multiple years, not just this short year. So I really appreciate the approach and look forward to finalizing our budgets today, and then looking at what we might need to do in April in terms of that surplus for future years.
Thank you, Mayor Eisenberger. Right on time as the timer goes off. And just a reminder, if there's any other councillor who has questions, we don't have anybody indicated in the queue. So any further questions on the presentation? Councillor Pearson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies. I just wanted to make a note for the clerk that I am back in. I finished my other virtual meeting, so she could note me for voting. Thank you.
Welcome back. And Councillor Ferguson for a second time.
Yeah, I just want to respond to the comments about the police budget. And yeah, I was very proud to champion that forensic building. It was drastically needed. I think members of council who did tour it agreed, because it got wide, significant support at council. But the fit-up cost was covered last year in 2020. They actually occupied that building mid-year last year. The only thing that could spill over into 2021 was the annualization of utilities, which is not $1.7 million, which is the difference between 2 and 2.9%. So I just want to clear the record up on that. And so I'm really struggling with whether support or don't support. 2.1 is getting very, very close. It really bothered me for the first time in my political career to not support a budget. But those two areas still trouble me. And I was very interested in Mike's answer that our tax arrears have actually gone down. So I found that very interesting. So I appreciate that update. So that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And so Mayor Eisenberger for a second time on questions on the report. I thought you were just hoping to move the recommendation, but
no, when the time comes, I'll be happy to move it to get it on the floor for.
Excellent. Okay, so the presentation is before committee for approval. May I please have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor, please do vote electronically. And Councillor Pearson is indicating a visual confirmation of her vote. And Councillor Collins has indicated his approval of the presentation as well. Guess I should vote too, huh? And that carries. Given that we did get into Q&A around the report, we do still need to finally approve the report. Moved by Mayor Eisenberger, seconded by Councillor Wilson, and is on the floor for discussion. So report 6.1. So your electronic vote in order to get the report on the floor.
3, Madam Deputy Mayor, no, we don't need an electronic vote to put the report on the floor. We just need the mover and seconder to put the report on the floor.
My apologies. So the report is duly moved and seconded. And Mayor Eisenberger?
Yeah, so not to reiterate everything that's been said already, I think given the current circumstances and having an eye to, future years, this pandemic impact is going to be with us, for a couple of years. I think we can all anticipate. And we may not be able to rely on our federal and provincial partners to be there all the way, because at some point they're going to be challenged fiscally as well, and so it may land on some municipalities down the road in terms of ensuring that we have some resources available to us. So the outline of the surplus and setting it aside for future needs, I think, is a very wise strategy indeed. And at the same time, we want to continue to maintain services in our community and get them back up and running. And as others have pointed out, even though we're all working virtually, there is an awful lot of work going on in our city. And at the moment, in fact, even the vaccination itself is diverting an awful lot of our existing employees, and we're hiring in more to be able to accommodate the vaccination regime that the province has pretty much now landed in our lap to actually put into effect. And so, that's going to require, significant resources and staffing. I think we want to maintain all of those resources and staffing to ensure that we can get all of this work done. And at the same time, when appropriate, get all our facilities back up and running later on in the year with hope that we have enough people vaccinated that we can get back to some sense of normalcy, that all of these facilities can get back up and running, our transit system gets more fulfilled, and we start heading towards a more fulsome revenue stream in all of those areas that can help offset our future taxes. So I'm really delighted with the work that our staff have done. It's been very, very challenging. I think for everyone involved, fiscally as well as emotionally in the broader community. It will continue to be a challenge. As we work through the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months, probably even more challenging than it was closing down facilities and locking things down to prevent the spread. We now have that and vaccination and the demand for supply and, of course, the anxiety of individuals in our community wanting that yesterday, all to be done this year in very, very, I think, difficult circumstances. So I think it's time to put this budget to bed so that we can get at those very important issues and continue to relay to people that we want our city to continue to look after our infrastructure, keep our employees employed as much as possible to help support the economy. We have laid off significant amounts of part-time individuals in respect of the COVID issues. Some of them are back now in terms of school crossing guards. So we've done all the things necessary to ensure that we're in good fiscal shape to come out of this in a healthy economic recovery. Hopefully better with potentially some changes in terms of reflecting on what the pandemic has done to this community. I think I've gone on long enough. I support this budget. I appreciate the work that our staff have put into this and council. And again, a difficult year to work through. And I think we've done, an admirable job of getting to what I think is a reasonable number to reflect on, what the taxpayers might contribute to ensure that our city continues to be healthy and continues to prosper and grow. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Eisenberger, for your comments. We do have a speakers list. So Councillor Jackson, followed by Councillor Clark, and then Pearson. Councillor Jackson, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Nan, and to all my colleagues. My apologies. Was escorting a medical matter in the family, and I just got back now. So I'm not going to, believe me, no moans and groans from my colleagues that I'm going to start all over again. I promise you. I would just simply ask Deputy Mayor Nan, I'm pleased that we're inching closer to what I would have ideally liked to be, which I've said publicly, 1.9. We're at 2.1. Seems to be a very responsible level of tax increase if we're going to approve eventually. Can I just ask for you and Deputy Mayor Nan, if my couple of questions have been answered, then if you want to provide the answers in summation, I'm perfectly fine with that. One of my questions was delving into this surprising large surplus that the General Manager Zagarek imparted upon us today that I found out about late yesterday. If between now and March 31st, our council meeting, if we're going to ratify the 2021 budget, if we hear in the next 3 weeks anything more from the province or feds about additional COVID-related funding, could that possibly be brought to our attention? Because I understand why we want to bank for now. This large amount, given this pandemic, unfortunately, is still with us and probably with us for a good share still of this year until our community is entirely vaccinated. But I'm just wondering if in the next 3 weeks or so we hear some additional COVID related funding, it may not alter the 2.1. So Deputy Mayor Nan, if that's been answered, you want to give me a summation, great. Otherwise, I would direct that to General Manager Zagarek, please.
And that is a unique and separate question. So over to you, General Manager Zagarek.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, absolutely. If there are further updates as it relates to continued commitments, funding commitments from senior levels of government, we'll bring that information forward. I would suggest it might have a greater impact to that surplus figure, and that surplus figure could go down. So we could reduce our reliance on the restarts as well as provincial federal funding for 2020. Reducing our surplus position for 2020 and setting those funds aside as committed funds to help us through 2021. So to the councillor's question, if we receive firm commitments for 2021, I would suggest it may amend the strategy that you would have seen before you that formally comes before committee end of April, I believe April 21st. Reducing our overall surplus for 2020 and then relying on those commitments to see us through 2021. So apologize if that's a little confusing, but it would still represent, I would summarize by saying it would represent a opportunity for us to have firm commitments, and that opportunity could be realized through 2021 rather than through the surplus that you would have seen presented to you as a preliminary forecast for 2020.
Okay.
Thank you, General Manager.
General Manager, I got the gist of that. That wasn't too complicated. Thank you very much. Could I also then ask, communication on this budget, Deputy Mayor Nan, is going to be maybe more vitally important than in recent past years, because we didn't have a pandemic in recent past years, or the SARS and swine flu we had in this century were short-lived, fortunately, nothing like this. So Director Grant, in my humble opinion, in my office's opinion, has done a yeoman's job since he's arrived here in Hamilton with communications. Maybe if I could just ask for you, or if General Manager Zagarek wants to speak for Director Grant, if he's not available, or the City Manager Smith wants to, I need to know and share with the 2.1% I'm going to support the communication to my constituents that the level of service of all departments is being maintained to the utmost degree, that as soon as we can reopen facilities, COVID reduced, we're going to do that based on categories, red, orange, eventually yellow, hopefully to normal ultimately. And in terms of the extra efforts we've put into our 2 long-term care facilities, Macassa, Wentworth Lodge, the additional things that Council's done, Deputy Mayor Nan, in terms of setting aside reserve funding for the Kenilworth Reservoir contaminated soil, Shadow Creek spill remediation ultimately. I guess I'm giving my list, Deputy Mayor Nan, of what I'd like to see as part of a communication package to our community that has been hurting over the last 10, 11 months. And with a 2.1, I just need to be able to message it out there that their local government is continuing to serve and support them to whatever degree we can. So whoever's on the docket that may be able to answer that, Deputy Mayor Nan, and that'll be my last question.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, maybe I'll start, and I see that our City Manager, Jeanette Smith, may want to add on to my comments. We're happy to work with Matthew and his team in formulating what I believe are a series of positive messages to the community. Just bringing committee members back to the capital budget process is, you may recall that Council approved a overall capital financing strategy that exceeded what we were forecasting for in 21. So what that represents is additional investments in areas such as long-term care and housing, but additional investments across a number of our portfolios, which will help with job creation coming out of this recovery. So again, addressing our infrastructure deficit, but some targeted investments in housing and long-term care over and above what we were forecasting for 21. And again, that was in conjunction with investments in year 5 of the transit strategy. And again, that's pending some approvals from senior levels of government. So again, some positive messages on the capital side. On the operating side, I think there's a series of positive messages for our community. Is base funding, to Councillor Jackson's comment, base funding is there to ensure continued program delivery when we come out of the pandemic into a recovery, so that we have funding to support the delivery of recreation services, our DARTS program for our seniors and vulnerable in their population, continued having commitments there for our tourism and recreation program, which saw disruptions because of the pandemic. So on the topic of ensuring that we have funding in place for recovery, I would say yes. And in fact, to the councillor's comment about reserves, and I appreciated the reference, is council took a different position maybe from other municipalities where we paused on contributions to reserves to help our 2020 financial position. We have reinstated those contributions to reserves to ensure service continuity and sustainability of infrastructure. So those are just some of, I believe, a series of positive messages that our community need to appreciate and understand. And once again, we're happy to work with corporate communications, Matthew and his team, in formulating that leading up to March 31st.
Great response, General Manager Zagarek. City Manager and/or Director Grant, I see anything to enhance or complement that, especially the optics of the reserves and why we're continuing to hopefully preserve them. Any further comments, Deputy Mayor Nan, through you?
Thank you.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to members of council and the public. Certainly, we appreciate that during the pandemic, it feels like some of our services aren't being operated because things that are extremely visible, like the Parks and Rec Center, haven't been available. So the senior leadership team's been already working with Matthew Grant, our Director of Communications, to ensure we get those messages out through our media partners and through your offices. And if you like, Matthew can give you an outline of what sort of tactics and things we're planning on using.
That'd be great, City Manager Smith. And Deputy Mayor Nan, if all my colleagues would benefit from that, I think it'd be nice to hear that as well right now from Director Grant, please.
Sure. Through the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Jackson, we have a variety of tactics that we're planning. The way along, we've been giving sort of budget updates to the community as they've come up, with budget presentations, letting people know where their tax dollars are going. If and when Council decides to approve the budget, we'll give a fulsome release that explains what has been approved, how we have been operating to deliver services in a modified format while ensuring that we have the capacity to return to regular service as public health measures allow. And we will also have several releases that follow that focus on specific areas of community interest, such as housing and the like, so people can see the extent of the work and the extent of the investment that Council has made in issues that are important to them.
Great. Director Grant, thank you. Deputy Mayor Nan, thank you so much for your indulgence. And we are at the lower end of our comparators too, sitting at the 2.1, so that's encouraging. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And moving on to Councillor Clark, and also thank you to City Manager Smith and Director Grant for the supplemental there on the questions that Councillor Jackson asked. My apologies. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Nan. I'd like to pick up where Councillor Jackson left off. With regards to communications, one of the things that I found interesting when the Toronto City passed their budget is they had this big announcement about all the money that they had saved through the budget process. So is it a possibility that staff can produce a summary of the savings that lowered our initial increase, proposed increase on the operational budget to where it is today? Because our staff did an awful lot of work in crunching those numbers. I'm not sure if that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Through the deputy mayor, yes, councillor, that's a possibility. I'll take a look at how we can do that. At the very least, as part of our final budget announcement, we can certainly have a backgrounder that explains how we got to where we are and gives people access not only in a release format, but we'll have that information on the website.
Thank you, Director Grant.
I think thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I think in light of the surplus that we're now talking about, it would be really helpful if we can share with the public the total savings through this budget process so that people can understand exactly how much work has been done. With regards to the police budget, I share the concern of Councillor Ferguson in terms of they didn't hit their 2%, but I supported the police budget based on their justification in their report to council. And in my mind, when I was looking at the police budget, I was reflecting on what would happen if council opposed the police budget based on their justification for the increase, with the acknowledgement that they did go back to the police service budget and come back with a lower figure, and how that would work through the Provincial Police Commission. And we would not have, in my mind, the justification at the commission to oppose the budget successfully. So from that perspective, I think the Police Service Board did the best they could with what was before them. They've justified the increase, and I supported the police budget, and I'll continue to support that budget. The 2.1%, ideally, I'd love to hit our 2%. I'd love to have hit Councillor Jackson's 1.9%. I understand the explanation from Mr. Zagaric in terms of using the surplus or the tax stabilization fund to lower the budget down artificially to that 2%. And I use the term 2% artificially because we'd really be looking for that additional $1 million in 2022 and in 2023. So it just continues to roll out. So we'd have to find that. So I understand his concern, and I agree with his concern. So based on where we are today and how close we are to the original 2%, I'll support the budget at 2.1%. And I really want to thank staff for helping us get there. I didn't think we would get down there. I thought we had some, and I knew we had some huge challenges before us, especially with COVID. And I think they have done, as Councillor Jackson has opined from time to time, a yeoman's job in getting the financial numbers down to where they are. So I want to express my thanks, not just to the finance staff, but all of the departments who had to crunch those numbers to find the savings to get us down to that 2.1%. Thank you very much. That's everything that I have.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Moving on to Councillor Pearson. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and to my colleagues who have spoken. I don't want to reiterate a lot of it, but I absolutely agree. You know, I was hoping that we could get under the 2%, but I am supportive of this today. I believe, as has been mentioned to Mike and to all of your staff, to our PR, Matthew Grant, I think it's been, you know, we're on the right road. And I've said over a number of budgets over the last few years, you know, and I tell residents, there's no fat in our budget. And you know, our staff are working with a very lean budget, and it gets tougher every year because that's where we've directed this. And you know, when I went back, because as I was sitting here listening to Mike's presentation today, you know, we have to go back. 2018, we came in at 1.9. We weren't dealing with COVID then. 2019, we came in at 2.5. Last year we came in at 2.9. So I think we're in a pretty good and a pretty safe range to be sure that we're on a reasonable target for 2022 as well, because as Councillor Clark raised, we have to be respectful of the fact that whatever we do here does affect the budgets going forward. So I'm very supportive. I really do look forward to the information that can be put together through Matthew and Janet and Mike, as far as explaining to the residents in a simple form what we've been able to save and what we've been able to increase because, you know, I think we all should be very proud. We haven't done cuts at the City of Hamilton, and we should all be proud of that. Our staff have assisted in helping us to be sure that we've continued the services that our residents receive now and will continue to receive at least over the next year or so. I'm pleased with the reserves issue. I think it's prudent that what's being recommended is being done, because I think Mike raised in our last presentation that other communities, when we questioned how communities are coming in at zero or low numbers, they're actually using their reserves, and that's not healthy, and we know that. Because we know there's issues that can come right out of nowhere, COVID being one. Thankfully, we're getting funding from 2 levels of government, but there's others. There are city issues that, you know what, we may need this money, and either we save it now or it goes on a tax base next year or the year after. So I think I'm comfortable with where we're at 2.1, and I look forward to the next round of when Mike brings back all the reports of how the wards are affected across the city, and if I will put one more plug in that I am pleased with the police budget. It has come down over the years as well, and we have to remember that. I mean, we came in at times where not only our own budget started at 12% way back in the early 2000s, but the police budget has come down over the years too, where we've actually approved 5% and 6% police budget increases. So they've been very responsible in getting them down and increasing their service levels with the forensic building, etc. So I'm very supportive. I don't think I can't thank staff and Mike enough for what they've done, because they truly see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel on our budget issues every year. So thank you, everyone. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Well within time. And moving on to first-time speaker, Councillor Danko, then followed by Councillor Partridge. And we have second-time speaker on the list, Mayor Eisenberger. If any other councillors want to indicate, please do so. Councillor Danko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to kind of go back to the beginning of this multi-month budget process, can I just ask through you to General Manager Zagarek, when we started in 2020, what the projection was for 2021? This is pre-COVID. This was just our multi-year budget projections from the previous year.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we were north of 4%. So effectively, we've shaved about half of where we had started in the fall of 2020 as it relates to the tax budget process.
So in the fall of 2020, that was during COVID, when we were kind of projecting for the year end, we were north of 4%. But before COVID even started last year, what was our projection for 2021?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, again, similar to our starting position, 4%. So how we prepared the budget was for a normal year with the anticipation that we would have some savings, avoided costs, and we could leverage provincial and federal funding. So to the councillor's question, our forecast for 2021 back in 2020 was just north of 4%. Maybe it was 4.6. And I believe when the budget books were prepared, we were at 4% in December, and that is relative to where we are today at 2.1.
Thank you. And if I recall from the budget discussions last year, there was quite a few pressures on the 2021 budget outside of COVID. And then, of course, going through COVID and all the uncertainties. So to go from, projections over 4% to something that's fairly close to the target of 2% is really nothing short of miraculous, considering all the uncertainty that we've gone through as a municipality through this year. And then, as was previously stated, our comparator municipalities were at or below those. And then the last thing that just to compare our budget to, so just to be clear for everybody that might be listening, that if we don't meet inflation, we're actually cutting our services. So looking at the consumer price index for 2020, it was pretty variable. There were some ups and downs, but basically looking at the Bank of Canada, it was around 1.9% to 1.3% with a bit of a dip in the summer. So we are pretty close to the consumer price index rate of inflation. It's probably a little bit different for Ontario. But the city of Hamilton as an institution, as a corporate entity, we're not buying groceries and those kind of consumer price index products. We're more closer to the building construction rate of inflation. So if I look at building construction, non-residential, for Toronto, it's actually up around 2.5%. For Ottawa, it's around 3.7%. So comparatively, we're pretty close. We're either at or slightly below the rate of inflation, which means that we're maintaining the services that our residents rely on at the rate that we are setting today. And just again, going back big picture to where we started, the fact that we're even close to 2% is absolutely amazing, and it just shows the professionalism and the great work that our staff do behind the scenes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Danko. Moving on to Councillor Partridge. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And you know, absolutely kudos to everybody who's been not only involved in putting the budget together, but you know, the work to get us from, as previous speakers have said, that, you know, over in fact, I think it was 4.6%. Was that where we started, Mike? Or Brian?
Yeah, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. One of our early forecasts was at 4.6%.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And you know, similar to Councillor Ferguson, I was thinking this would be the first budget that I would not support, because it just seemed like 4.6% to get down to where I wanted to be was around 1.9%. You know, just seemed almost impossible, and yet here we are. So it is, to me, nothing short of miraculous. With significant improvements and infrastructure builds coming to Ward 15, particularly in the Waterdown and area with a new police station, you know, the bypass under construction, and servicing the new fire department and police department division, which will service all of Flamborough, right across the other wards as well. So we're sitting right now at 2.1, and yes, as much as I'd like to get down to 1.9 across the entire city, I was assured and understand from staff yesterday that the impact for Ward 15 residents will in fact be around 1.8%. And that is significant because, you know, we have an impact assessment coming next year. Thank goodness it did not happen this year. And, you know, the prices of houses in Ward 15, as in many wards across the city, are now around that 800,000 to $1 million for a townhouse. And if you want to have a residential home, you're looking at close to $2 million. So it is really, it's unaffordable, and it's just getting way out of control. And to me, having a tax increase that would just exacerbate people getting into that category of being house poor was just not something that I could live with. So we're right now looking at Ward 15 around 1.8% with significant infrastructure investment being made. We have a surplus, which is going to go toward paying down our debt and also into preparing for what is going to continue. You know, I don't think we can say it may. COVID is going to continue. It's not, in my estimation, it's not going to be just for the balance of 2021. I see this as, you know, a real wake-up call that we need to change how we do business. We need to change how we take care of ourselves, change our health care going forward. And there's going to be some expenses around that. Yes, absolutely. Kudos to the provincial government and to the federal government for the investments and the money that they have put forward to help us. But, you know, we've still got a lot of time to go through and deal with COVID and deal with some upcoming costs. So I can support this budget going forward, and I do appreciate your time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Partridge. First time speaker, Councillor Ferguson on the report, and then second time we have Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, one quick question through you to Mike. Mike, Councillor Partridge just said that she knows what the impact will be to Ward 15 at 1.8%. And I asked this question earlier on the budget process, and because there wasn't a reassessment or done by impact in 2020, that everybody would get the same increase in all 15 wards, which would be 2.1 if this carries. Did I get that wrong?
Yeah. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I know that this information was shared with Councillor Partridge, and I just received it, I think, yesterday, so we will share it with all committee. To Councillor Ferguson's question, generally speaking, no. The vast majority will be at that 2 to 2.1% range. What is affecting Ward 15 differently is area rating of transit. Because of the level of service, number of kilometers delivered to that community. So the vast majority are at 2%, 2.1% for total tax impact. Just again, as Councillor Ferguson alluded to, there are no reassessment or tax policy impacts in 2021 because of the provincial decision to pause on reassessment.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Okay, so you know what each ward is now, so you can email that out to us later, can you?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I believe Brian McMullen's team have that information, and I'll ask Brian McMullen if he can send that information on to all committee members.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Moving on to Mayor Eisenberger and then Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I just have a process question. I know that we have item 61A, Accessible Taxi Cab Financial Incentive Program, to decide on, which I assume will have a 2021 budget impact. Should we be deciding on that first before we finalize the 2021 tax-supported operating budget?
Elsie Paparola.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I did clarify that with staff yesterday and was advised that no, it won't affect the numbers that are currently in the report.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm happy to call the question, but I think you have another question.
We do have a couple more questions, and Councillor Pearson, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Mayor. My only question is just for the public also. So, Mike, could you please just reiterate what 1% of the budget amount was? I remember, I think it was about 9 million. Did you just advise?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the councillor is correct on the municipal portion. It is 1% represents 9 million. When you roll in education, 1% represents $10.5 million.
Wow. So we've actually saved, starting at 4.6 projected, we've come down to we've saved $2.5 million. So that's better than 18, almost $20 million off the budget. Am I reading that right, Mike?
Yeah. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, simple math is it would represent about $18 million in efficiencies or savings or adjustments that we made through the budget process.
Excellent. And I think that was very well worth having that information out there publicly, and hopefully it'll be included in our documentation that goes out as well. Appreciate, and I think we've thanked everybody, and I think most importantly, I'd like to thank Stephanie, the legislative assistant, and all of the clerks who have been involved through this process as well. I know it hasn't been easy getting the documentation on eScribe for us, so I just want to put a thank you out there as well. Okay,
thank you. Duly noted and heard in the chambers, I'm
Thank
sure. Moving on to first time speaker on the report, Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Just a procedural issue. I would need to, as I have in the past, declare an interest to prevent a conflict on the boards and agencies where police is referenced, as my sister is a police officer, and it's per the, as I've mentioned in the past, per the recommendations of our Integrity Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. So that will be item B in the recommendations that is before us in report 6.1. So we can prepare to separate out B in order for you to indicate your abstention. It does mean, however, your abstention will apply to the collective of boards and agencies, as the police services budget is not separated out in that item. I see no other further speakers on the report. So there we have it, folks. Members of council and committee, the report recommendations are before you. Item 6.1. Do you need me to read through the recommendations for the public record, clerk?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, no. And what I will be doing is putting up the two separate votes. The first vote will include all of the recommendations with the exception of B, which is the boards and agencies. And then I will put up the second vote that will be for the boards and agencies so that Councillor Collins can declare his interest.
So first report will be the entirety of the recommendations subtracting recommendation B. The second vote before committee will be recommendation B. So abstentions and votes can be documented accordingly. Excellent. So it will be popping up electronically before you, members of committee. These are recommendations. Recommendations A, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and Q are before you in the first vote momentarily. About to bust out in a song that my kid sings, but we'll save everybody from that. So, okay, there you go, right in front of you.
My grandchildren are doing the alphabet when they're washing their hands.
My daughter's doing it while she's brushing her teeth. It makes for a pretty funny bathroom time in the morning. Excellent. So vote is in progress. And Councillor Collins, you are indicating in the chat that you are approving the vote that's before us. Councillor Pearson is also a thumbs up visually. Vote is closed. And it carries with one abstention, with one negative, 13 in favor, 1 opposed, and 2 absent. So moving on to recommendation B, this is the boards and agencies component of report 6.1 that's before you. And it will be up also electronically in a second. Vote is up. Councillor Marula, oh, perfect, thank you. Vote is closed, 10 in favor, 3 in opposition, and 1 abstention with Councillor Collins. Thank you. Congratulations, Dee, for moving forward with the recommendations for the 2021 budget. And therefore, the budget carries to council for final ratification. So moving on to agenda item 6.1A, Accessible Taxi Cab Financial Incentive Program. It is moved by Councillor Collins and seconded by Councillor Clark. The motion is to put the matter respecting the Accessible Taxi Cab Financial Incentive Program on the floor. Is there any discussion respecting the matter? Sorry, my apologies, Mayor Eisenberger.
No, I'm fine. I think I support the recommendation, and it's all good. Thank you.
All good. Okay. So no speakers on the item. We'll go forward to a vote. And Councillor Collins has registered his vote in the chat. Vote is closed, and moving on to general information, item 11. Are there any items for general information or other business that council committee members would like to raise? Seeing, oh, Councillor Collins?
Yes, I was going to ask, as I stated publicly, I would like, from a budget perspective, Metrolinx and the MTO to approve or to appear, before council at some point to answer some questions that we have regarding the LRT. So I don't know if I need to put that in the form of a motion or how.
Related to the budget process, Councillor Collins?
Well, related to the budget, related to the project, which was included in this year's budget. And of course, whatever impacts that project on a go forward basis will have budget implications. So I just need to know procedurally how we could move to request their attendance at a future meeting of GIC.
Procedurally, Councillor Collins, you would need to move a motion. And in the meantime, Mayor Eisenberger on this topic.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if today is the day, or do I do that at a future meeting? That's all.
Okay.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, if he wishes to do it today, he can do it today if committee is in approval. And just to clarify, Councillor Collins, it would come back to a regular GIC for future budget information, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Councillor Collins, you're giving notice officially then, and we'll see the final language for the next GIC?
Well, I'd prefer to put it today. It took them forever. It took them forever the last time we made the request, and so I think my next opportunity, if I wait till the next GIC, is 2 or 3 weeks away. So I'm in the hands of committee. I would move it today. Essentially, we're asking them to appear. We're not approving anything other than that, and I believe that there are others who are anxious to hear them as well, and that would be moved. However you see procedurally to put it forward right now, it would be moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Ferguson.
Got it. Okay. And then Mayor Eisenberger. So now that it has been duly moved and seconded on the topic.
Thank you. So I can tell you that letters already been drafted and I believe sent a couple of days ago on anticipating that I do want to hear from the Minister of Transport to have a clear picture and understanding of what they're pursuing and working on. So I can just tell you, feel free to pass the motion, but I've already drafted a letter. I believe it's already gone to ask the minister to appear and/or Metrolinx to appear before City Council to explain what discussions are happening around LRT.
Thank you. First time speaker on the motion is, oh, my apologies.
Sorry, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So we have a mover and a seconder to waive the rules. So that is on the floor. Councillor Collins, did you still wish to move forward with that on the floor?
I would, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do that vote first, and then you can discuss the motion. Sorry.
Okay, so waiving is up first. We need a vote on that electronically, but have further speakers on the topic. Thank you both. LC support in the chambers is always excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, and that carries on the motion as it is before committee. Now that the notice has been waived, Councillor Partridge, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate this motion coming forward. Whether a letter has been sent or it has not been sent, or it's whatever that issue is, I think this is really important for us as a council to have a vote on something that it's been out there in the media and it's being talked about for months and months and months, but particularly lately. So I really appreciate Councillor Collins and Councillor Ferguson bringing this forward. I find it almost embarrassing that there is, this discussion going out on there outside of council that doesn't include council, that has not included council, that is really going to impact our residents. And, it may not be this year, it may be next year, we don't know. And it is so important that we have that opportunity for Metrolinx to come in and chat with us. And yes, it took an awful long time before, but we're in a different place now. This is really serious. We have LIUNA out there, as has been reported in the media. This is nothing new. That, they're out there negotiating on behalf of council, it appears, which I find very embarrassing, to fund a project that we've had literally no input in. So it is high time that it has come back to us. You know, there's so many questions. There's property that's owned by LiUNA up and down the route. There's financial impact there. Are they going to be part of the bidding process? Is all of this being negotiated? And it's without us and without council's involvement. And from what I hear, without the mayor's involvement either. And, you know, I find that all very, very disturbing. There has been no direction coming from council for any of this to be going on. And I am very, very concerned about the impact that it is going to have on our residents going forward with any potential increase in taxes. And the fact that I'm hearing that the federal government, you know, is already, yeah, this sounds great. Well, we haven't been a part of it. So that's all I have to say. It is high time that that we took some control over what is going to be happening in our community. So I thank the movers very much. I'd be happy to third this as well, as I'm sure a couple of other people would around the table, and very much appreciate my colleagues' consideration of this, and very respectfully. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Partridge, and you can third it in indicating your vote when the vote is before you. So next up is Councillor Farr, please.
Are you catching me right now, Madam Chair?
We can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just quickly, I appreciate the motion. And just the previous speaker mentioned LiUNA. My question was with respect to LiUNA as well, and I'm just wondering through you to, I would suspect the Clerk Paparella, is it prudent then to, given the public, very public and supportive investments that they've pursued, that they wish to make, it appears at least through media, would it be prudent to welcome LiUNA to the same GIC that Metrolinx will be attending should this here motion pass?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Unfortunately, no, we do not invite delegations. When Metrolinx and or the MTO accepts, if LiUNA wishes to speak as a delegate, they would follow the same process as everyone else. We do have to keep that process the same for all members of the public.
Okay, that's why I ask, and I'm sure you know, myself or someone will make that suggestion, and they may be, I would suspect, giddy to come before us as well. So I appreciate that, and I'll support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farr, and Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can I get an understanding as to exactly what the feds have offered the City of Hamilton for LRT?
So City Manager Smith or anyone else? Mayor Eisenberger?
Thanks. You know, at this point, absolutely nothing. Other than they've expressed an interest to participate, and so there's nothing on the table. And these conversations are happening between the province and the feds, because the province actually put forward the LRT project as one of their priority projects, in concert with the 5 other projects that they lumped together in Toronto. And that has ensued in terms of you know, additional discussions with the federal government. To my understanding, at this point, no agreement has been made, and no funding has been put on the table. That is a conversation that's ongoing.
So do we know then, Mr. and I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. So do we know then, is there an upper limit to the amount of funding that the feds are willing to put on the table? Like, is there a policy that they have to follow, or could they actually contribute 1.5 billion?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I also just want to acknowledge that I see City Manager Smith is also on the line and prepared to answer questions as well. So I'll pivot to you, City Manager, and then Mayor Eisenberger, if there's anything else you want to add on the question as well, that would be welcome.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to confirm, because I know the mayor answered from his office and what they've heard. I want to let council know that I have reached out several times to senior officials at the MTO to ask them about what are the next steps. I know what you know in terms of their press release out that we've been included as part of those 5 projects being submitted to the feds, and I keep hearing information is coming, information will coming, and nothing has come to date.
Thank you for that. Councillor
I
Clark.
guess I just want to express my frustration, and it's not with anyone around this table, that this discussion between the province and the feds is going on while council has not endorsed any of the new proposals or alternative proposals or anything in terms of LRT in this term. So it's frustrating not being at the table as a council with a position as to how we wish to proceed, given that it would appear that any federal funding is based on municipal funding, and we don't even know the percentages of funding or what the request would be to the city. I do not understand what LiUNA is doing, because this is supposed to be an open bid that will happen through an RFP process. So I'm not sure exactly how a finance and union can be negotiating with the federal government on funding when we're committed to, as a municipality, an open RFP process on any of these things. So it's very confusing. I think it's causing confusion in the general public as well. And the sooner the federal government, provincial government, and the municipality can come to an agreement on what is on the table and what council needs to consider, I think the better would be for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. No further speakers on the motion that's before us. Oh, Mayor Eisenberger.
Yeah, just to be fair, I mean, I don't want to get kind of pulled into a great debate here, because you know, this is overtly caused by the province canceling this project in the first place. We have 0 staff now. All of the staff that we had working on this do not exist anymore. There isn't a single person that is heading up the LRT file on behalf of the city of Hamilton. So the conversations have been stilted by virtue of the fact that we don't have anybody that's in the know, you know, consistently talking with the federal and provincial governments, other than you know, city manager that's asking for information, and myself that keeps asking for Minister of Transport, when are you going to come to the city of Hamilton and clarify what your direction is? The most recent direction we received was that they've added this as a priority project from their perspective to the federal government for, you know, looking for a different funding model. That's as much as we know in terms of detail. And I think it's unfortunate that, you know, a lot of the staff, we had great staff. If you remember Chris Jacobson, who ironically now is working at Metrolinx, was, you know, one of our great staffers that, you know, kept us in the know and kept us in the loop. I do know that Andrew Hope still works here out of the GO station, and I think he would certainly be an individual that we'd very much want to have come representing Metrolinx to come and talk to us about what they're proposing, what they're suggesting, how they're kind of working through some of these issues that many of you have raised. So I'm as interested as you are to have them come here and start explaining, you know, what it is that they're looking to achieve, and obviously at the end of the day, they're looking to achieve, you know, an LRT. So, you know, that's certainly not a surprise. I think it was unfortunate that they canceled this project in the first place, and then came back to a task force that our city manager was on, and a number of other credible individuals in the community was on, and came back with higher order transit is the priority, should be the priority for the city of Hamilton, and then the province has taken it from there. So I hope that we get information from them sooner rather than later. I fully agree.
Thank you, Mayor. And no further speakers on the motion. The motion is before you electronically.
Through Madam
Yes,
through Madam Deputy Mayor, may I just ask clarification from Councillor Collins? Do you just want it to read that staff be directed, or would you like it to read that the city manager?
I'm comfortable with whatever Jeanette feels comfortable with, so take her direction in that regard.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Clark.
What about the federal government? Because they have not discussed any of this with council, have not asked us any questions about it. This is just happening out there without our involvement. So will the federal government, the federal minister or ministry staff be invited also? Like, I'm struggling to understand exactly where we are on this because none of it has come to council for a decision.
Thank you. So Elsie Pepperella, if you could just review the language of the motion that's before committee right now.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The language that I currently have is that the city manager be directed to invite representatives from Metrolinx and the Ministry of Transportation to a future general issues committee to discuss LRT in Hamilton.
Thank you very much. So, and Councillor Clark, in terms of your question, are you proposing an amendment to the motion that's before us?
I guess I'm asking Councillor Collins his feelings on it because it's his motion.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you. And my opinion at this stage is that this is a provincially driven project at this point. They've unilaterally changed it. They've unilaterally sent the funding request to the federal government. And I think we need certainly answers as to why that's occurred. And, you know, like many of my colleagues, you know, I'm not certain there's support on council or in the community for a revised project. So I'm anxious to hear how they foresee this project going forward without any City of Hamilton support, because as we all know, we've never been a part of the operating or capital budget related to this project. And so lots of questions, to be clear, Councillor Clark, and you know, there's obviously lots of conversation now about wouldn't those investments be better served investing in our citywide transit system. So I understand that. I understand how the feds have been kind of thrown into the mix, but I'm not certain what they would have to disclose, because right now they've just been asked for funding. And I think right now this project has been largely led and guided by the provincial government and their bureaucrats. Sorry.
Thank you. And so I just want to acknowledge that there's the conversation is spurring more requests for speaking. So I just want to name that Councillor Ferguson is a first-time speaker requesting, and Mayor Eisenberger, you would be a second time on the motion. So Councillor Ferguson.
I thought I still had the floor.
Oh, my apologies, Councillor Clark. I thought you were complete.
No, thank you. And I just wanted to indicate to Councillor Collins that I understand his rationale and I'll support the motion. Hopefully the province can provide us information on the funding model that they're discussing with the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I support the resolution. Obviously, I second it. And, you know, since the start of this program, a main reason that some members of council, including myself, come on side was 100% funding from the province. And of course, I see them turning to the federal government for their share. And if you look at projects in the past of this type, these infrastructure projects, 40% federal, and then 30%, 30% come from the province and the balance from the municipality. And so it does concern me that I hear all this discussion going on about a reduced route down to Gage Park up to McMaster University and going to the federal government for money. But I'm just curious to know, are they now going to be looking for the city for millions of dollars too? And I'd feel more comfortable if I had the answer to that now. So I support the motion.
Thank you. Mayor Eisenberger.
So just so you know that you know, whenever I'm asked about this project, and you will know that I'm fully supportive, and I think ran on a mandate to do this you know, in the last election pretty strong. In fact, that the answer to both levels of government when they ask is that there cannot be a capital contribution from the City of Hamilton. That's not the basis of this project. The only thing that we did and did commit to through our memorandum of understanding was the annualized operating, which was in the order of $5 or $6 million. That was clearly something that the city had said that was an area of responsibility they were prepared to commit to, and nothing has changed on that. So I agree that this is a provincially driven process at this point. They canceled the project. They came back and put a task force in place. They've indicated their desire to continue to move forward on this, and so they're going to need to explain how they're proceeding on this, because we certainly don't have any staff that have a high level of understanding of where they've been at. But in answer to your question, Councillor Ferguson, whenever I'm asked, it's no capital dollars from the City of Hamilton.
Thank you for those clarifications. So clearly, this committee and council is prepared for the next iteration of the discussion. And thank you for all colleagues for answering the questions that were raised in terms of previous memorandums of understanding and commitment, the reality that the province did cancel the project and then brought it back in this iteration that we're seeing publicly through media. And oh, my apologies, Councillor Partridge. I didn't have the screen up. So I'll pivot to you and then come back
thank you
to
very
myself
much.
as a
And I did
first-time
put
speaker.
I did come into, well, if you're first time, I'm second time, so you can absolutely go ahead.
Thank you. Reminder to turn the chair over. Thank you. Turning it over to previous Deputy Mayor, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. So yeah, back to where I was, appreciating that there was a previous memorandum of understanding in the previous council approved LRT plan that the province canceled and then has brought forward a different iteration that we as council are only hearing about through media. So I appreciate the rest of my colleagues' desire and the need for us to unify around the conversation moving forward based on what's before us in terms of a funding model, but also in terms of our investment in local transit here in our city, and recognizing that this conversation is absolutely one that is tied into a post-pandemic model as well. So from that perspective, I just wanted to remind council that it was identified as an economic recovery critical piece to establish economic recovery for our city through the task force that's been examining the issues that would lend the kind of development that's supported in the city, but also from an employment perspective, as well as supporting the need of our residents to move around freely. So in support of the motion and taking back the chair, and over to second time speaker, Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I just want to remind everyone that, you know, the annualized operating budget, what we committed to was when the memorandum of agreement came forward, that it would outline all the costs, and that, you know, to Councillor Jackson, I think his famous phrase of off ramps, that there would be, we were assured there would be some off ramps in there, that we would be able to review this memorandum of agreement. And at the time, I believe it was promised to come to us within 8 months. I don't know how many years ago that was. I think it's like 5 years ago. So we've never seen that. We've never seen what the operating costs are. We don't know what the operating costs are. And I can tell you from all the years I've been on this council would never commit to something that they had not seen the costs laid out. And we have not seen the operating costs laid out. So I just want to remind everyone of that. We did not commit to taking on the operating costs because we don't know what the operating costs are. So I'm very pleased to support this motion. And really that's, you know, what we want to hear. We need Metrolinx to come forward and let us know where they are in the process. What's being negotiated behind the scenes? What are the costs going to be? Because we don't know what the costs are going to be. Now that the scope has changed, I think it becomes an even more critical conversation. So thank you, Madam Chair. Respectfully, I appreciate the time.
And speakers list is exhausted. We will move to the vote. And the vote carries. 13-0. Moving on, and last agenda item is adjournment. May I please have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Peterson, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Please vote so that we can adjourn this meeting. And as that vote is coming through, again, thank you to Garrick, all staff across the corporation who brought forward all the work that landed us in the recommendations that were approved today to be ratified at council for the 2021 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well done.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agreed. Well done.
Much appreciated. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, adjournment carried.
Excellent.